Spy Cops Info Podcast, a series on the secret undercover political police that infiltrated over 1,000 groups since 1968. Episode 36. Class of 68 Part 2, The Car Crash Fixer. Welcome to the Spy Cops Info Podcast. My name's Tom Fowler and I'm joined with...
Chris Bryan from the Undercover Research Group.
So we've been doing like a bit of a... We appear to be doing a mini-series on the early management of the SDS. If you haven't listened yet, I recommend checking out the Conrad Dixon episode. But now we're going to look at his sort of like his deputy at the beginning. But more importantly, he's someone who stuck around a lot longer with the Special Demonstration Squad, Phil Saunders.
Yeah, I think a more important person than Dixon. Because Dixon basically, obviously, was important in terms of the formation of the squad and its first few months of operation. But if you listen to the Dixon podcast, you'll find out that he left pretty shortly, at some point around mid-1969, around that time anyway.
Yeah, but Phil Saunders, he comes from C Squad. There's a suggestion he's still doing C Squad work when the unit for his first form, but he sticks with the unit for quite a few years. We've done an episode a little while back on the annual reports. He authored like the early ones of those.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he authors the first report, the first two reports, 1969 and 1970, and I think those reports are really important in the sense that these reports are basically the justification for the unit, which is sent up the ranks through the Met, and basically is like the begging, if you like, the internal justification within the Met for the unit to continue. So the form and the content and the way it's set out, it lists it lists the groups and it says why the unit's so important in terms of getting all this vital information. That format, it basically doesn't change at all. So Saunders discovers what this, if you like, the successful formula for a way of justifying and continuing the unit, and then that formula was copied by all his successors. So I think it's really important, and it's also important in the sense that they're not entirely accurate.
What a surprise! SDS document not entirely accurate.
I mean,
shocker.
We know admitting in his interim report, he really steered away from criticising anybody.
yeah, pretty much.
But very much he avoided criticising many police officers at all, even those, which is most of them, who very much deserved it. However, there was a couple of people he criticised, and one of those is Phil Saunders. And in one respect that he criticised, it was Phil Saunders sort of listed the most dangerous groups, the biggest public order threats. There's quite a few of those, but one of those he identified was the Independent Labour Party.
Which was infiltrated by Doug Edwards, episode 1.
It's an Independent Labour Party. They basically didn't say boo to the goose. It would be like, I'm sure they were involved in quite a few campaigns. They went on demos. They had like anti-colonial politics. They were a very small party, which,
But I mean, crucially, supposedly the aims of the SDS, they had nothing to do with public disorder and they had nothing to do with subversion.
Yeah. There's quite a few. I mean, and basically, admitting says he doesn't really understand how that could be in any way justified. And similarly, in the next report, I believe they talk about the anti-apartheid campaign specific, don't they? And basically,
some depth.
Saunders says in that, he basically says it's a threat to public disorder throughout the country, suggesting that the planned protests of, for instance, the Stop the 70 tour, the disruption of the cricket team tour, was it the
rugby
and the rugby later?
Yeah, the Lions tour, touring South Africa. Yeah,
these would snowball into basically chaos throughout the country, which is clearly ridiculous. And so ridiculous about even Mitting said it was ridiculous.
Yeah, Mitting does mention Phil Saunders quite a few times, most notably on this stuff. I'll just read a bit of it out. In his memorandum of the 18th of November 1970, Phil Saunders made the following observation. When there was a sufficiently emotive issue, such as the Stop the 70 tour campaign, which guaranteed broad-based support and the attention of the mass media, The extremists were able to seriously threaten the maintenance of order, making it imperative that advance information of their plans was available. As Mitting points out, even without the benefit of hindsight, his observation is difficult to understand or to justify. It may reflect his fears of what may have happened had the tour not been called off, but this is not an accurate reflection of what in fact occurred.
So there's that. So I think that's one aspect of his time at the SDS. I think the other one though is that during his time with the SDS. So just to recap, he took over command from Dixon in November 1969 and remained there for almost 2 years to August 71. During that time, there was a number of officers were arrested and a couple taken to court, drink driving. I think the very first one was Sean Lynch, wasn't it?
Yeah.
For obstruction of the highway. It was pretty. It was like was it outside the?
I mean, they all relate to driving offences and having taken on drink, as much as I remember.
But the important thing is that Saunders intervenes not once but like 3 or 4 times in the criminal justice system to make sure that probably 1, the unit's secrecy isn't compromised, and 2, the officers aren't compromised.
Yeah, but he seems very willing to make the call, as it were. In some cases, this involved explaining to us about the existence of the unit, which is meant to be super secretive, even within the police. We're starting to see now that the SDS were quite an open secret within the police generally, it would appear.
I think maybe it's changed a bit now, but there's definitely, always go back to yes, ministers. The idea of being sound as having obviously conservative politics, generally the small c, you'd probably say, but also means keeping secrets. So I think there's this expectation that the whole, if you like, establishment in inverted commas would keep these secrets.
Yeah, but it's also expecting uniformed cops who are pulling guys out of cars who've just crashed into a tree because they're pissed on the way home, and like explaining to them what the unit is, it would appear. There's quite a few times where we get this impression that like ordinary coppers are hearing about the existence of the unit right from the early days of it.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I mean, so that's very true. So basically, it's important about the arrest because that became a key feature not only within the SDS, but also the successor unit, National Public Order Intelligence Unit. The arrest of officers became also routine, as well as the connected interference with the criminal justice system and miscarriages of justice more seriously. So 4 documented occurrences. The first one of those is like Sean Lynch, cover name. He was an Irish Gaelic speaker, so first safe to assume he's actually Irish. He later became SDS manager.
Yeah.
He took part in an unauthorised money collection for Irish Republican prisoners with 3 other members of London Sinn Féin. And they were travelling in Lynch's car, which was borrowed from the Metropolitan Police's carpool, which suggests a rather showy operation, doesn't it?
I mean, really basic.
They were stopped by the local police, but obviously the difficulty there is the car will be traced back to Scotland Yard. So they had to intervene in this and make sure that Lynch wasn't prosecuted. He was actually cautioned then because although they were told by some uniformed officers to stop doing this unauthorised collection, one of the Sinn Féin members decided to carry on and got himself arrested.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think actually that's an interesting thing as well, because we know that in terms of vehicles, they moved away from using a carpool to buying second-hand cars. And although it's not said, I can probably easily see that as the reason why they moved away from doing that.
Yeah.
And there were several ones. Yeah, Stuart Goodman, he got pissed on the way back from the pub with activists and crashed his car into a tree. And it says, even though he was intoxicated, he was not arrested at the time, and in fact, instead given a lift home by the officers.
Pretty standard police behaviour on finding a drunk police officer in charge of a vehicle, just give him a lift home.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that. So, comparing him to Dixon, think of him as like a backroom fixer rather than this show-off that like Dixon was.
He strikes, it appears a very different character. Unlike Dixon, he didn't write his own obituary, so we don't have him in his own words at all. I don't believe anywhere. It's all we're kind of basing him on is what's coming through the documents and what other officers said about it, things about him.
Yeah, I mean, Queen suggested that he was. I think the implication is a bit boring, though, in some ways, and that he was much more interested in accommodation than the groups and the administration side, which is borne out by the fact he becomes the head of a squad, which is the administration squad within Special Branch much later.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think that Creamer says about him was that he it might seem surprising for somebody who's working for Special Branch that he wasn't very much interested in politics.
Very few of them are interested in politics. I mean, like the Creamer thing, which I have got an episode to edit, he was the only one who seemed in any way interested in politics who we've heard from so far. Even with the more recent bunch, I guess Trevor Morris kind of was interested in politics. But
I mean, I think some Roger Pearce as well.
Yeah, in his own way, but I don't know, it's kind of, I mean...
And Graham Coates as well.
Okay.
I mean, it's not that I'm not suggesting that.
It's quite limited. We're searching around here, right? I got the impression that Roger Pearce was interested in politics in the same way as the 14 Times is interested in politics. Do you know what I mean? It's for a lot of these undercover officers who are specialising in infiltrating political groups are not particularly interested in politics.
I mean, I think that's true. I think that is true. Yeah, there's a few comments on him by officers Dick Epstein, who described Dixon as a brash chance, said the opposite about Saunders, saying he was very nice, true gentleman, supportive, helpful, extremely kind. I mean, that's more interesting as a comparison to what he said about Dixon and anything else.
Some of those were quite gushing about it. I mean, like Dick Epps was, an extremely nice man, a true gentleman, very supportive, helpful, and kind. I mean, he obviously did him a favour and got him out of some trouble at some point, I'm sure.
One of the main things, that's like the shortcomings of what we know about Saunders. We don't, unlike Dixon, at least we get his self-propaganda about himself. We don't actually have Saunders speaking at all, really. And I suppose the annual reports are the nearest we get to that. And
sure.
We're not talking about himself there, so we don't really have that kind of like juicy kind of first-hand assessment, but we do know what he got up to next in the police, which it seems to be, although it's not actually said anywhere, that he probably moved to B Squad. So B Squad after 1969 and the start of the Troubles became wholly concerned almost exclusively with the IRA, provisional IRA.
Sure.
So it seemed that he moved over there. I guess a whole bunch of Special Branch officers would have been transferred to concentrate on that. One of the interesting things, actually, not interesting, weird things, I think a Tranche 2 officer said during the hearings was that there was the two most coveted roles that were the most kudos in Special Branch in his time was being an SDS undercover and being a personal protection officer. Which struck me as a bit odd because at that point, Special Branch had responsibility for the IRA, and you would have thought, within that would have been thought more important.
It's certainly more serious.
It is, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it was seen as a bit too scary or something. I don't know.
I mean, I suppose it's personal protection. You can see, you actually heard about that in the Trevor Morris. That obviously a lot of these couples loved hanging around with these famous, important people.
I mean, I think this is a real hallmark. This is something this speaks to a lot about who they are. I mean, I've said it before in a few places. I think this is like they're a bit like these butlers, from these old English kind of country families who thought they were like part of the family, but really they're part of the furniture. I think like kind of the way, because they've been close protection officers to prime ministers and princes and whoever bloody else, they've got they take it kind of personally, revolutionary groups and stuff, and like anti-monarchists. When you consider the likes of Trevor Morris, he was a personal protection officer first, and then he went into the SDS. And then back to doing personal. I think it really colours the way they see the world in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, and I kind of understand why, from their point of view, why they would think that's important. What I don't understand is why, for instance, they'd think that infiltrating the Independent Labour Party would be more interesting than like investigating bombings.
Sure.
Than the IRA.
I mean, maybe one thing we have learned is that they were probably the best paid officers in the Met at the time. I mean, financially, perhaps this was just because there's so much overtime involved, and overtime that, especially in the early days, included time when you were asleep, they were being paid.
Right. I mean, from the testimony, in Tranche 1 officers, they didn't really mention the overtime, did they? It became a more thing. Late 70s and 80s, like Phil Cooper.
Maxed out the credit card.
First, in connection with that becomes like a thing, an important thing in or at least some of them.
We don't know how much it wasn't put to the early officers, particularly about how motivated they were by the overtime. Where it's something which has been put later on.
It was mentioned. It was one of the standard questions they had in there. They were put to them, which they answered in the written statements. And most of them, at least the Tranche 1 officers, didn't think it was important. It didn't increase their pay noticeably, is what most of them said, I think. Whereas that seemed to have changed at some point. I mean, I suppose at the point, I think that was probably related to how much a lowest ranking copper got paid in 1968 compared to one 10 years later.
Sure.
So I suspect it's connected as well. Obviously, overtime is only a lot of money. If you actually, your basic rate of pay is a decent whack, isn't it? So
yeah, sure.
Maybe that's it. Saunders, we think, probably went to B Squad. He was mentioned in relation to the Special Demonstration Squad a bit later in terms of approving its continuation as, I think, the Chief Superintendent. And then he made a move to the exciting Standing Admin Squad before he was retiring. In 79, he was given the Standard Medal by the Queen, which coppers get, which is the Queen's Police Medal.
Right.
Most of them, I think most senior officers would get that. So he was in the Mount for 31 years.
This is an incredibly short episode, if that's the case. But I guess the thing about Saunders, you get the impression that the way in which he operated had a huge effect on what the unit ended up being like. He really set the sort of the tone and like you say, the fact the annual reports were the same pretty much every year after that.
And the fact that, obviously one of the things we know about Dixon is that he lied in his obituary. And so there's lots of tradition of deceit, like Saunders carries the torch for in the annual reports. And also in terms of nobbling the courts in favour of his officers. And so that, I think that is really important, that if you like, perhaps you would say in isolation, like Dixon lying in his obituary is like, oh, so what? It doesn't really matter in the wider scheme of things. But like Saunders lying in the annual reports and basically perverting the course of justice, that is much more serious. And that is like, that perception, not just deceiving the activists they're infiltrating, but deceiving everybody involved, the wives of the officers, but also senior officers. And none of these arrests, of course, it should be said, appeared in the annual report, that's for sure.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, and this is it, right? It is about lying to everyone. And we see that just on the really basic level of the reports that the officers are returning about. They're full of falsehoods, full of fantasy. And we see that time and again throughout the history of the unit.
One thing, I suppose, of course, which we didn't touch on, 1969, is that the remit of the unit massively expands from, obviously beyond the group's organising the October demonstration to basically everybody on the left. There are a few exceptions to that, of course, but anybody on the left who could at all, even independent Labour Party, very hard to justify that on public order or in fact any other grounds. But certainly expansion into anti-apartheid movement is obviously quite a big step, and also to Irish solidarity groups as well. That happened pretty quick as well.
Yeah, and these would have been Saunders' decisions, right, at that point, because Dixon's gone by that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So, did he just cast about and try and think of anybody he possibly could, really? Because, it does seem an incredibly wide net.
I suppose, it's telling that he became... I think within bureaucracies, they're empire builders, aren't they? And I think he was much more of an empire builder than Dixon. Well, Dixon wanted to do one thing and move on to the next project. Where Saunders was very much, how can I make this bigger? And how can I make this project continue? And that was the way he did it. He basically threw away the tight remit of the October demonstration. Didn't just extend it by a little bit. He just went, everybody. Now, let's just who we can, and just set them off in various directions, and see what they could bring back.
Yeah, totally. That was Phil Saunders. A short episode this time. I'm afraid particularly when these officers are dead and there's very little information about them, we try and do a deep dive and present basically all the information we have on them, but sometimes that's just not a great deal. Maybe more will come out about Phil Saunders. I somewhat doubt it. I kind of feel that's probably always going to be it.
Yeah. Yeah, so as you know, this is like when Saunders is still second in command, and he's sitting at a desk somewhere in Scotland Yard during the 27th of October 1968 demonstration. There's a telegram from Saunders to the Chief Superintendent Special Branch that he's been with a group. So Saunders is on the streets there. So he's with a group of anarchists from Glasgow and Liverpool who led a charge towards the US Embassy in Grosvenor Square. Well done, Dan.
Yeah, all hail the Liverpool anarchists and the Glasgow anarchists. All hail. Fair play to the lads and lasses.
So just a bit of colour.
That was Phil Saunders. We've mentioned a couple of the other sort of managers. This might turn into a mini-series of managers. We are due to hear from 5 backroom staff in a couple of months' time, so there's plenty of managers we could work through. Thanks for listening. If you haven't heard any previous episodes, please check them out. Tell your friends. Give us a review. Give us a like or 5 stars or whatever it is that they give on the podcast platform you listen to this on. You can find more information about all this just by searching for the hashtag SpyCops. Thanks for listening. Thanks to everyone who has given us a review in the past. We're going to react to some of the last loads of reviews we've had. We haven't done this for a while. We don't get many reviews, but when we do, it really makes a big difference to the kind of algorithm on the podcasting platforms. So whatever podcasting platform you use, if you're able to give us a 5-star review, if that includes a comment, that would be really, really great. Apple Podcast does this. I'm not sure if Spotify does. Lots do, many don't. But if you are able to, it makes a huge difference to how much our series is heard by people. These are all a bit old because we haven't had one for a couple of years, actually. So if you are able to give us a review, we will give you a shout out on the next time we do a reaction. But yeah, let's start.
Thank You by Michael Ackroyd, 5 stars. This show allows us to understand the struggle you have had, the trick and the strategy of the state to block your day in court. Thank you for allowing us into this very personal struggle. I hope that justice comes down on your side. Congratulations on an excellent podcast. I hope you can find some peace and so able to move on.
Very nice. I presume that one would be about Kate's episode.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think they've been some of our best episodes, the ones with Kate involved.
Oh, yeah, great.
Kate Wilson, legend of movement comrades. Check out her episodes.
Top-notch expert takes on scandalous abuse by UK police. This is from Lantwit 1977. 5 stars. Anyone who's been involved in social movements in the UK during the last 60 years has to listen to this. Even if you haven't been a protester, you've got to listen to this. This is a scandalous story straight out of spice fiction, but it's real. The podcast presenters are absolutely great at making this stuff accessible, bringing home the scale of the police abuse and infiltration into people's lives, giving us the benefit of their meticulously researched expert knowledge of spy cops. The mainstream corporate or state media won't go near this stuff with a barge pole. It's been left to activists who were spied on themselves to do their jobs for them, which they do in the start of this pod. Thanks for all of your hard work. All of you. There is no justice, just us.
Thanks, Andy, for that one.
Oh, that's lovely, isn't it? That's nice.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I feel a bit embarrassed, like listening to that. It's a bit gushing. It's a bit over the top.
Well, you know.
I mean, thanks. Yeah, I mean, by all means, continue to. Obviously, you can support the podcast financially if you want to. Go to ko-fi.com/Tom B. Fowler. You can give me money. You can support the Undercover Research Group because Chris is being paid by them. You on the clock now, technically?
Not really, no.
No, fair enough. I mean, it doesn't really work like that, does it?
Vital Listening by Forest Friend 51, 5 stars. Readers of Ian Colbain's book, The History of Thieves, will know how opaque and secretive the British state is. This podcast is a very unusual glimpse through that opacity. Each episode unpicks the evidence of the undercover policing, revealing the sometimes laughable absurdities of the Met groupthink, but also their links with MI5 and the civil service, state distrust of even the mildest forms of left activism is exposed, making this podcast important not just for the UK listeners, but as a contribution to the wider picture of the ideological intolerance that settled over the West during the Cold War and continues today, leaving us all the poorer.
I've never read that book. Is it any good?
Yes. It's about the hiding and destruction of files on predominantly on the Britain's exit from their former colonies.
Oh, the Kenya stuff and that.
Yeah.
Didn't they dump it at sea or something? Didn't they dump all the files at sea?
No, I mean, they probably did some of that, but I mean, they said there was loads of stuff which they actually had in this random warehouse.
Right.
In Sussex or somewhere, or Berkshire or something, which they eventually found,
Bastards. But I mean, a great review again. Thanks. I mean, it feels a bit sort of self-congratulatory going through these, doesn't they? But people left us reviews. Please leave us reviews. It makes a huge impact, and we'll shout you out.
Essential listening for understanding UK spy cop scandal by Cass M. 5 stars. I cannot recommend this podcast highly enough. Tom Fowler and Chris Bryan of the Undercover Research Group, plus their many guests, do a fantastic job of explaining the nuts and bolts of both undercover policing and the major activist, legal and state responses to it, and why all of this matters. The coverage of the ongoing undercover police inquiry and Kate Wilson's recently concluded case with IPT is especially compelling. This podcast took me from knowing very little about undercover policing in the UK to reading widely and getting absolutely hopping mad about it. From the first episode, I was hooked. I've now listened to every episode to date. I'm looking forward to hearing the coverage from the UCPI as it resumes on May the 9th. I would love to hear more interviews with other activists about their experience and perspectives. Keep up the good work.
No, thanks very much. That's a good review.
That's a great review, yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I would love to hear more interviews with other activists about their experiences and perspectives. So, other people who've been affected by any of this, please, we're always open to doing episodes with anybody who expresses an interest. I'm always trying to widen the number of people involved in this podcast, and it'd be great to have more people involved. If you're affected in some way, if you're a core participant in the inquiry, you know how to contact us. Suggest an episode.
5 stars by Ortep, essential and insightful. Insightful and shocking insights into a woefully underreported political scandal spanning decades. This is essential listening to understanding the extent in which politics and social justice campaign is policed and controlled by secret, and often illegal, means within the UK, or justified by self-fulfilling intelligence reports which bear little resemblance to reality.
Words.
Wise words indeed. Thank you for that, Ortep. And then the last one is from somebody in Belgium, Marilyn in Bruges.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
Fascinating insight by Marilyn in Bruges. Thanks, guys, for keeping us up to date. Interesting interviews of people at the heart of the police infiltration into the lives of ordinary people. I like the relaxed feel of the podcasts. Keep it up, all of you. 5 stars.
That's very kind of you, Mum.
So that would appear to be Chris Bryan's dear mother, who resides in Belgium, giving away some of your personal details there, mate. Sorry about that. Well, my mum hasn't left a bloody review, has she? So, Mum, if you could leave a review of the podcast series on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. I think you use Apple. Anyway, the point is, and if anybody is up for giving us a review, we would absolutely love to have them. It makes a huge impact on how our podcast gets distributed and who ends up listening to it. Over the last few years, we've been a bit infrequent in releasing episodes, so we kind of sort of build up a bit of an audience and then it dies off again. A lot of our subscribers aren't regular listeners. We've got nearly 2,000 subscribers across the platforms, but most episodes get about 1,000 listeners. So, we need to find some new listeners. So please help us spread the word and review the podcast wherever you find it. All right, thanks, guys. Cheers for listening. If you want to listen to any other episodes, you can find them all. spikeops.info. We're on all the usual platforms. Cheers. Bye.
Nice. Cheers, mate.